Walking along a path at the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road towards the Anselm Society digital pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and, well, the nature of clipboards. In the corner by the fire are three people. One of them is proudly showing off one of her favorites, a flamboyant, gold-embossed peacock. And yes, it's on my clipboard. That's me, your co-host, Christina Brown. Welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories so that we can better understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Today, we are talking with Matthew Clark, author, singer-songwriter, and dear friend of the Anselm Society. Today's topic is about his marvelous chapter in Anselm's inaugural book, Why We Create. And if you want to know more about that book and what it is, listen to the episode with Brian Brown for a smash-bang introduction. But Matthew's chapter is entitled The Art of Subcreation, and today we get to delve into the difficult and often misunderstood concept of what it means to create simultaneously with and for our Creator. I'm here today with my co-host, the beautiful Mandy Hauk. Mandy, I know you just came back last night from a long trip and you're a trooper for hanging out with us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. Coffee is miraculous.
It is.
It is.
It's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
It is.
It is.
And delicious.
And delicious.
I mean, what's not to love?
You
What's
can
not to
drink
love?
it. You can just drink it, right?
You can.
Up.
You can. Just drink it. Drink it in.
Just drink it. The nectar of the gods, my friends.
Yes.
You can't drink everything that's good, but coffee is one thing you can.
Well stated. That is true.
Yes.
And speaking of things that are good, Matthew, welcome to the podcast. How are you on this fine morning?
I'm also benefiting from said coffee.
Yes.
Glad to be here. Very glad.
I'm so glad. Well, I was benefiting from coffee too. In fact, I managed to get a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks this morning, and there's huge debate over whether pumpkin spice is cool or not. I'm on the yes, it's cool side.
I am on the let people love what they love side, even though I despise pumpkin spice lattes with every fiber of my being. It does not diminish my love for you to hear
good.
that you love it.
It's a strong debate.
I just can't stand it.
I stand
I'm a black
firmly with
coffee
pumpkin.
girl.
Black coffee's good too.
Yeah.
I like my Americanos.
Yeah.
But I also like my pumpkin spice
I'll
lattes.
confess to you both that I have never in my life experienced a pumpkin latte of
Yeah.
any sort.
I had
don't even
one
know.
sip
Okay.
because my daughter worked at Starbucks for 3 years. And by the way, she would go get her coffee at other places and then put it in her Starbucks mug to go to work.
Yeah, that's fair. Starbucks is not for everyone. I do enjoy it, but
Yeah.
it's fun. But yes,
But yeah,
I do like the PSL.
Yeah, I
It's a
don't
cult
think
following.
people need to just let people love what they love. Like, don't harsh anybody's mellow. Just enjoy more for you. If I don't like it, that's more for you.
That's true.
There
Brian
you
went
go.
to one the other day, and they were all out of pumpkin spice syrup. So that's a good point.
Well, that's another reason that Bethany has, hatred for pumpkin spice lattes, because she worked there. And when people come and they're out of PSL, they're not really nice to the workers.
Yes, that's not fair.
And it's
Those
really
people.
not the workers' fault, people.
No.
Be nice to your workers.
Exactly.
So,
Well, as much as I love pumpkin spice, let's get to the topic at hand. And there are so many remarkable directions that we could take with this episode because, Matthew, your chapter is so rich with the images and connections that really they each deserve a podcast of their own, or an episode podcast. But since we only have one episode to work with, we will touch upon just a few of these incredible concepts. And listeners, if you want all the goodies, yes, you will have to buy the book. Okay, so first things first, defining terms. The title of your chapter is called The Art of Subcreation. So can you define for our audience, where the term subcreate comes from and why the term in all its complicated and very expansive meanings is an integral part of understanding our role as creatures of God?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think actually Tolkien may have coined the term. I'm not saying that with authority, but I think that's true.
I know, I've heard it both ways.
You say it in your chapter, so therefore...
Did I say it? Well, then it must be
it's
true.
It's in writing, so...
It's in writing, therefore.
It goes back to the idea of the doctrine of ex nihilo, which is that God created out of no prior existing material other than himself. Which is an important Christian doctrine because it means that God is not his creation. He's not he is in relationship. He is caring for, he is involved in, and then of course he becomes incarnated and enters into his creation. But he is separate from his creation, and he has created it. He is not a creature. God is not a creature. So part of the idea then is that strictly speaking, there is only one creator, capital C creator. There is only one who can create out of nothing, and that's God. And so everybody else, all of us, we create out of the givenness of creation itself. We are given materials by God, and we take those materials and then we unfold and explore and make new things. So we are always creating from inside of creation. And God is both transcendent, but then he is also immanent because he is caring for what he has made. So we are sub-creators. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I loved is, and I'm just going to quote from your book right here, from your chapter, is that it's not just that we can do it, sub-create, but it is by God's design.
Yeah.
We are to be real collaborators with and under our Creator. And you say God is calling upon your imagination and mind to play a real part in the development. And it's I think that has been something that I did not used to really understand. And being part of Anselm has helped me with that. And also the writings of Dorothy Sayers have helped me to understand. It's not just, not only is my writing not just a hobby, it is my vocation, but it's also integral to all of us as God's beloved children to create, to sub-create, as you said, whether that's artistically as the world defines art, or in other ways. Like Dorothy Sayers talks about even in engineers, like my husband Peter is an engineer. I think we as humans tend to define creativity only in those artistic terms, but it really is as we are just walking through our days, we are partnering with the Lord in our creativity
and life.
Yeah.
Right. It might be fair or helpful to say it's sort of the human office.
Yes.
Nice.
It's kind of like this is the position or the office and the very posture of the human creature in the world is sub-creator.
Yes. And I love that.
And so it's not
the posture, that's really
that's
good.
really, yes.
It's not just something that's like a little segment of, this guy paints or this woman sculpts. It's really everything could be sort of seen in terms of that office.
Yeah, it's not an activity. It's a status and office of posture.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
And you talk about how like this has been like very much an integral understanding to humans from the dawn of time, but also even just different religions as they've sort of passed from under Yahweh and sort of taken their own turn into what gods they've chosen. But so in some way or another they've had gods right above them, but modernity, we've kind of taken God out of the picture, and so there is no God at the center. And so the way you put it, which I love, is originality is so different because we tend to think of originality as needing to originate from us. But if you think about the origin, like capital O, that's God. And where do we originate from? And where does our work? And where does all that stuff?
Right.
So I love that.
Well, when I was growing up, I started out on kind of classic rock guitar. I was really into Jimi Hendrix and all the kind of late 60s, early 70s, like, rock stars. And it took a while for me to get to some of the musicians that would sort of temper that in me, like Phil Keaggy and Rich Mullins. But there was a big idea of originality. Like, you kept hearing stuff like, nobody's ever done what Jimi Hendrix... Now, this actually isn't true, because he was a part of a tradition, a blues tradition. Mm-hmm. But the way, as far as I knew at that time, like, wow, originality is, there's all this pressure to do something no one else has ever done. And I just remember as a kid, that was really almost debilitating. Because I was so afraid that it wasn't good enough, or I had to come up with something totally new, which really is, you can't do that. So that's kind of a personal thing that the Lord brought me out of that was a big relief. But then to say, like, no, what's really going on is God is helping us locate ourselves within the fabric of His own life and His own work in this world, which means that He is telling us that there is a story to this world that He is telling. Like Chesterton said, I began to have this weird feeling like maybe there was a story to the world, and if there's a story to the world, then there must be a storyteller. Mm-hmm. But you have to, in some sense, have a feel for where did I come from and where am I going in order to locate yourself here. Mm-hmm. And the only way I think to do that is to not to come up with something totally new, not to reinvent the wheel, but to go try to find the wheel. Mm-hmm. And here is God. He is the origin of all these things. And I love Come Thou Fount.
That is my favorite, not just my favorite hymn, but just my favorite song.
Isn't it
lyrically in the world?
It's so amazing.
Well, as a songwriter, it's one of my favorites because it's a song about songwriting.
Yes, it is. I never even thought of that.
Because he says, Come Thou Fount, or origin.
Yeah.
Right.
Come Thou Fount, from whom all blessings flow.
Yes.
You are the origin. You are the one. So I don't need to be original in any other sense other than to return to you and to draw from you the fount of every blessing. Tune my heart.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yep.
If I'm going to sing a song, if I'm going to be an instrument of your peace, like St. Francis says, you've got to tune my heart. I'm a broken, out of tune, warped instrument, and you got to rebuild me so that I can sing this song that was always there.
Yeah. Always, yeah.
I want to be a part of the thing of reality itself, which is your life, God. How can I get back to that?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's such a calming thing to understand. And I think the older I get, the more cool I am with this. Like, just the less I'm like, oh, I need to be original and praiseworthy. But I think, it's so calming to know that you don't have to be. Right. And that there is someone. And it's a huge relief. Mm-hmm. And I'm so much happier the older I get that I get to be like, it's not on me.
Right.
Well, and one of the things you discover over time, and I'm gradually discovering, is that, I feel like a lot of younger artists will say, like, well, how do I find my style, my thing? And it's like, I wouldn't really worry about it that much.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you just try to make what is true and good and beautiful, like, you yourself are a unique individual that God has crafted, and like, that will just happen by itself. You don't really need to worry that much about it.
Agreed. And I talk a lot about how I'm 54. I just turned 54.
Happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday.
Thank you. And I whine about that and like, I still haven't published a book, whatever. But when I look back, I was writing books before, and there's a reason that they couldn't get an agent or couldn't get published. And it really is because I was trying to be imitative. So interestingly, you said what paralyzed you was thinking you had to be original. Mm-hmm. But I was like, paralyzed by trying to be imitative, and that just wasn't true to how God created me to be, and that is something that just in the past, I would say 2 years, I've really finally, when I sit down to write, I stopped trying to put myself into an imitative box of someone else who I admire, because that's not my voice, and that's not the voice God gave me. Mm-hmm. And so in the same token, where we're not doing something totally original, because the voice I have came from God.
Right.
So
the origin of himself within you.
Correct. But he does give us our unique voice. So it comes from him, but through us, it is something that is unique and beautiful and reflects the way that he has shown himself to me, which points back to him for, God willing, whatever readers I have.
Yes, yes.
You know, because the way that each of us relates to him is, I'm trying not to go back to the word unique, but there it is. It's individual, but it shows, we can show one another the face of God more clearly because each of us sees him and relates to him in a different way. And that's I think, why art is so integral to community itself. Like you talk about the Trinity in your chapter, and I mean, that's who God is. God is relationship. And I think art is one way, because the artist creating and then putting their art away, that's not the purpose of subcreation. The purpose of subcreation is that community, don't you think?
Well, yeah, and there's so many things I'm thinking of, but one thing,
I know.
one thing I think of, there was an idea I grew up with. I was a worship leader for a long time, and one of the things we used to pray a lot before leading worship was, Lord, make us invisible, make us disappear so they only see you.
Yes.
And I understand that sentiment, and I get the idea, and it is noble. But there's also this sense in that really is not, as far as I can tell, is not actually the Christian idea.
Right.
Because when Paul writes what Paul writes, you're getting full on Paul, but through that you're getting Christ. And aren't you glad John's gospel is so John-ish?
Yes.
And aren't you glad each author is so their personalities. So it's not that God is saying, I want to get some things done, and in the meantime, I'm going to totally erase your personality so that it's no, he does the opposite.
Right.
He says, I want you to be very much yourself. Or Tolkien, aren't you glad Tolkien's nerdiness about all the stuff he was a nerd about,
yeah.
Yep.
actually was encouraged and flourished, and that's what makes his stuff so wonderful. And that's what also gives it its potency for pointing back to Jesus.
Yeah, and it shows, there's infinite facets.
Kind of a paradox.
Yes,
it works
yes.
that way, but it really does.
Yeah, I had a worship pastor who would tell us to be invisible, and I would always wonder, how does that work?
But if we are living stones being built up into this temple for Christ, then the stones need to be substantial and present.
Yes, and beautiful,
and
each in their own unique way. Man, I got to stop saying unique.
It's okay. I found out. I realized. This is sort of a rabbit trail, but I think keeping journals is really helpful, and I think it's also important not to throw them away because you learn some stuff about yourself going back. If you can manage to swallow your pride and be like, I didn't say that, did I?
Yeah, some are cringe.
Yeah, some are cringeworthy, and yet no. But I was 14, and I wrote. What did I wrote? Oh, I think I was talking about giving a little speech for my sister's 13th birthday, or not 13th, I think it was her 11th birthday, and to her friends. And I said this, but whenever I get flustered, my adjectives just fail me.
Oh, that is so funny.
And it's still so true.
That is true.
So I keep coming back to things like unique. I know there's another word, and I keep saying, anyway, so you remind me of me anytime. Just there is a better word and I cannot find it.
Right.
But it's there, people.
Yeah.
But what I want to do is go back to, not go back, but keep going forward, Mandy, with that train of thought, and Matthew, that train of thought. In the subcreation, and it's kind of a how do we do this, right? How do we keep going forward as humans and keeping God as the source of our originality without erasing ourselves? And you had talked about a number of ways, but you also talked about the word intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how, yes, I know, Mandy's nodding.
I'm nodding because I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Because intelligence also is one of those words that can be really hard for a lot of us because I'm not smart, or I'm not intelligent that way. Or I get flustered. I can't use adjectives when I'm talking, in front of people, right? But intelligence is so different the way you talk about it. And it's really, really encouraging, I think could be to a lot of our listeners as well. Can you just explain a little bit of what you meant by using the word intelligence and its etymology?
Yeah. this was another thing that was just a big relief to me. I feel like God does that so often. He's just like, here's something that's stressing you out much more than it ought to. But let me tell you what it actually means.
Be still.
And you're like, oh, okay.
Yes.
But intelligence can be a really stressful idea because it's like, oh, I don't have enough of it. It's like this resource that, well, some people have some and some people don't, and oh well. But what really helped me was to look into the etymology of it and to have it pointed out that what it actually means is intus legere, and legere is the word that we get legibility from, so the ability to read something, and intus means into, like it sounds. And so basically the idea of intelligence, it's not something you have or don't have, it's something you practice or don't practice. And it means to read into things. So it's more like an idea of practicing attentiveness, or a cultivated posture or practice of beholding what God has already put in the things that He has made. And so I'm looking and I'm listening, and that is the practice of intelligence. And I was reading Scott Carnes, who's a poet recently, and he was talking about this kind of, he talked about like relational intellective powers or practice, and he was talking about the nous, this concept of the nous, which is basically the idea of, it connects back to the Trinity, that we're made in the image of these three persons, and that individuality is actually a lie. Or not, individuality is not a lie. Individualism is a lie.
Right.
That really we understand ourselves as persons only in relationship. And so as we are even reading into the space between us, we are developing a kind of intelligence that locates us in a fabric of relationality. And that's how we become people.
Yes.
But then that's also how we're going to enter more deeply into the calling to be sub-creators. Is not by trying to embrace individualism, but by finding people to make with.
Right.
But also to look at the things God has made and understand and see Him in those things, the way He's indicating His character, His ways.
And then I feel like He has created in us the impulse to try to make sense of what we're seing and what we're trying to understand from it by creating.
Make something out of it,
Yeah, make something, for others to appreciate. And there you have the community again, the community aspect of creation.
Yeah.
Of subcreation.
Yeah, I think that's, it's so lovely. And you talk about Tolkien, going back to Tolkien again, you said Tolkien was not automatically intelligent and therefore able to break the veil, but he was deeply invested in the long work of reading into the reality of things. And so obviously in this case by attending to his words in his work. And so you said, I can't help but think of Jesus as the Word through whom all things were made.
Right.
And in another place you talk about when we subcreate, we're not just trying to do this cool thing, we're trying to touch a face, we're trying to touch the face of God. We're trying to reach for something that we know is there, and we have this urge to create or this urge to do something well or beautifully. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be art. It can be making a meal for someone you love, or someone who's sick. I want to make cookies, and then if they don't turn out, you just get so upset. You want to touch that face. You want to touch that heart.
Right.
So I loved that.
Yeah. And I actually highlighted, we're on the same page, literally.
Nice.
Christina and me. Here's a quote from our Matthew Clark here. You said, the making makes us as we meet with our maker in the making. And I highlighted that, I pressed so hard with my highlighter, it went through to the next page. Even though it's the special kind of highlighter that's not supposed to do that. But I love it. But yes, I just, that is such a truth. And I think in my specific way that God has created me, when I am specifically making art, my writing, or also cooking. I love cooking, and there's just a calming, just a communing with God in being the most true to who He made me to be, and what He has asked of me to put into this world. Whether it's bread is my big thing, sourdough, or it's my or it's my words, the way He has asked me to create for this world through words. There is a hard to describe feeling. What did they call that? Never mind. I'm not going to come up with it until like 2:00 this morning. But there is. I'll sit up straight and say it. But yeah, there's just that. You all know what I mean. All the listeners, whether you're specifically artists, quote unquote, or not, there's that zone is the best word I can come up with.
Kind of the flow zone.
Flow zone, maybe.
It makes me think of Peter saying, we are being given this participation in the divine nature.
Yes.
And so I want to say participation.
Yes.
Actually, when you're doing something like that, the joy that you're feeling as you're turning your face toward a face, because creation is not lifeless, it is upheld and sustained and given life by the Logos Himself, who is a person. And whenever we're cooking or writing, we are turning our faces towards the Logos Himself, the Word Himself, and we're participating with Him in His life. And that's part of the joy we feel, is that, and even as you're looking into, you're reading into, you're reading into the legibility of God's own handwriting, the things that He has written into the things He has made. When you're saying, ooh, I wonder what this spice will do. Or I wonder what temperature I should cook this thing at, because it has a rationale, a logos to it.
Right.
Because He put it there.
Right.
And you're detecting it, you're reading it, and you're participating.
And just the feeling of kneading the dough and knowing what it's going to be, and watching it rise. What?
God did all that on purpose. He put all that in there for you to take joy in.
And Christina, with all her gardening, which I finally am figuring out gardening, and it is just amazing. Like, as you mentioned, I just came back from a trip, and I was gone for a week, and I came back, and my gardenias bloomed again. I'm like, what are you guys doing? It's September, but thank you. They bloomed while I was gone, and you know, so just taking part, participating. That's a great word for that.
And when you're gardening, you're having to attend to and behold and read into the nature of the materials, the flowers. Like, what do they like? What does this flower like, and this one doesn't like, or this thing needs and this one doesn't need? And I need to have a good relationship. And any artist knows that part of the joy of making is you come to love the material itself.
Yeah.
And you become intimate with it.
Yeah.
My brother is a ceramic artist, and part of the joy is like, I just like the way it feels when you push your thumb this way on the clay and the clay does this, and this other kind of clay does this a little differently, and you just fall in love with the materials themselves. But because they have quality that God has placed
imbued
there.
into them. Yeah.
Well, especially with gardening, I made the mistake of pruning 2 different plants the same way, and I literally killed one.
Right.
They wanted different things.
It was like wrong.
No, it's true.
And so there, I was not being intelligent because I was not being receptive to what the plants needed. I need to pay better attention. So now I know.
So then intelligence goes back to an idea of relationality.
Yes. Yeah.
Not just
so the other plant is doing great.
Right.
Yeah. So yes.
And it's the attentiveness, and Leslie Buster talks about that in her chapter too.
Yes.
But the attentiveness to it, and understanding that there is a personhood within it, and that each individual, piece, like plants or whatever, they have their own natures, right? So And you talked about, Matthew, that like when we create, we are in a way our work before we create it, and to be able to form it, we have to conform to it. And I love that. It says all of that reorients us to creativity, not as something we command, but as something we conform to, something that transforms and even sanctifies us as we practice it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the making makes us. That's been so true of my experience. That I don't go to write a song because I am fully formed. I go to write a song because I don't understand where I am. And as I write this, it changes me, and God meets me in it and brings me to a new place, you know.
Yeah. Well, especially as
that song becomes an Ebenezer. Here I raise my Ebenezer.
Yes. Yeah.
Hither by thy help I've come.
I got to go listen to that song again. But so as we say, the pantsers and plotters, like for me, the kind of writer I am, the kind of person I am, I can't plot out and outline the book first, because that robs me of the joy. Because my process is I write kind of like a reader. I don't know. I mean, I have a general idea of what I'm writing and where I'm going with it, but I rob myself of that discovery. And because that's how God has shaped me as a writer.
Yep.
And so it's the same way you said, I write to find out what is going to happen with this character.
And O'Connor said, I don't know what I think or believe until I write about it.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Or write about it. Or did you say write?
I think she said, I don't really know what I think or believe until I write.
Right.
I am so sorry. I misheard you. I thought you said read about it.
Exactly, but it's something like
that.
No,
you're good. That's what I was, I was going to say, oh, yes, or right. And then I realized, I misheard. He said right. That's sorry. I'm just a beat behind. But speaking of, I want to move on to another part of your talk, but before we run out of time, and we still have some time, but I want to make sure we give this topic due credit, because we're talking all about the purpose of creating and how to subcreate and how beautiful it is and wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. But you also talk about the challenges that come with the one who does not want us to do all these things, does not want us to conform or be transformed. He wants to separate. So you talked about it when you talked about the etymology of symbolical and diabolical. Yeah.
Blew my mind.
Yeah, it was so powerful. You talk about the devil's name, and and so could you talk a little bit about that for us? Just kind of unpack how important this concept is for understanding what we're up against?
Yeah, so I totally ripped this off from Ken Myers on Marcel Audio Journal.
Sure.
But he pointed out that diabolical's opposite is symbolical. So a symbol means to join together, and diabolical means to put asunder what God has joined together. Okay, let no man put asunder what he has joined together. And so that's what the devil is always doing. He's always trying to tear down. And John Oswalt is an Old Testament professor, and he was talking about Nehemiah and Ezra, those books where they're rebuilding after exile. And it's called the Tov work. And Tov is this word in Hebrew that means good, the good work. And it's everything God is doing all the time to put back together what the devil has torn apart. And so this is, again, part of our office, to participate in his work. But yeah, diabolical is anything that is, I have a friend who says, pulls at the threads to unravel the sweater. And we're always trying to knit the thing back together.
Yeah.
And so whatever you're doing, whether you're cooking for a friend or whether you're writing something, you're knitting things back together with God that have been unraveled, have been pulled apart.
Yeah. And the name for the devil in Spanish?
El Diablo.
El Diablo.
The separator.
The separator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, even Paul's passage, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And it is so true. And yet who is constantly trying to make us think that we can, or we can be,
Right.
It's also interesting to think about in writing and in imaginative work.
Yes.
We talk a lot about symbols, or in liturgies or sacramental theology, we talk a lot about symbols. And I saw that you had Alexander Schmemann's For the Life of the World. And at the end of that book, he has a great section where he talks about what symbols really are. And it really relates to this, because he says, well, the symbols of our faith are the things that, it doesn't mean we tend to think of a symbol as something that isn't real. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, no, that's not what the Christian believes. The Christian believes that the symbols are the things that reconnect us, that remember us to reality, to God himself.
Well, I loved what you said about the icon and idols. Like, an icon is not an idol, because an idol wants you to stop and say, oh, yep, you're the thing. You're it. But the icon points to...
icon is always pulling you forward. Come with me.
The
Come and see.
subcreation. The icon is a subcreation that points to the original capital C creator.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great segue, because I was going to ask Matthew to read his section on the icons and idols, because it is put so beautifully and so succinctly. And I think there is still a lot of confusion as to what an icon versus an idol is. And I understand that. It's very confusing if you don't have the right context. So as a segue, would you read that for our audience? Your own words?
Yeah, well, and quick preface, but like, humans are called, humans are meant to be kind of iconic, you know, that we are leading. Anyway, I'll read this.
Windows to a truer reality, right? Isn't that kind of a name for an icon, sort of a window into?
So, yeah.
So if people see us, they see the Lord, or that's the aim anyway.
Little Christ.
Yeah, the aim.
Yeah.
That's good there. So thanks to El Diablo.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Matthew. Go ahead.
So this says, every telling that we put forth in a subcreated artifact works like an icon. Icons subvert idolatry, because their work is to invite all who meet them to set their hearts on pilgrimage. See Psalm 84:5. Icons draw us into and through themselves toward the one to whom they bear witness. Every beautiful thing humbly confesses, no, not me, calling us to follow its beauty further, saying, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. Idols, in contrast, demand that we cease our pilgrimage of beholding, that moves us ever onward toward the beatific vision, that joy set before us, the face-to-face meeting with Jesus that is the destiny which through us the cosmos shares in. Idols say, stop here, I'll be your God. As sub-creators, we set our hearts on pilgrimage, rejecting idols, crafting icons that draw us and others back into the story God is telling.
Amen, amen, amen.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. So if we're going just a couple practical questions for our listeners, because this is also wonderful, but sometimes it's intimidating, because we want to go out and do and be, and yet we're like, but how?
Yeah.
So just a couple just kind of quick questions.
Sure.
Are there good disciplines you think that we as Christians can employ, like when we set ourselves artistic goals that are iconic in nature and not idolatrous? And obviously that's not something we'll succeed at every time because of El Diablo, and even in my case, like just the love of praise and wanting people to say, look at her, that's amazing. Like right there, that's El Diablo, subverting rather. Like I'm in it for myself all of a sudden. And so are there ways that just practices that either you've come across or that you've employed yourself that can really help us harness that intelligence, that seeing through, the apprehension that you talked about as we go about our creating or our just everyday work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing I think of is I've been really, really influenced and very helped by Diana Gleyer's work, and heartily recommend her book Bandersnatch, because reading that and just hearing her talk about how all these people I looked up to for so long, like Tolkien and Lewis, were not actually these sort of isolated individualistic geniuses. They were very much helped by one another. They were writing in community. They were reading each other's stuff, and friendship was such a core thing. So I think one thing that really helps is don't try to do this all by yourself. Like you need some friends. And that is a very vulnerable thing, because when you're making, you're drawing from some of those deepest places in yourself, and that's very vulnerable. But I think to be making with people, Cultivating Project has been so good for that, to be a part of. Both in terms of having someone tell you where something could be better, learning to be edited.
Oh, that's so hard.
Over the last few years has been hard, but so good.
So good.
There's a lady, Elizabeth Adams, and she's worked with me on the books I've been working on the last couple of years, and it's the first time I had ever hired an editor.
Yeah.
And just to have somebody comb through something I had written and say, I don't know what you're talking about right here. And I'm like, you don't know what I'm talking about? It's so clear. It's like, well, it's clear in your head. I don't know what it is.
It's not on the page.
But to see and to feel things get better because I have a friend who's in there with me, helping me see it, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
But also in terms of they can help you see good things that you can't see. They can help you when you feel like something you've written is total garbage. They can say like, no, I like it. And you're like, really? I think this is terrible.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, this really helped, And Lancia has done that for me. I wouldn't be writing stuff today. I would have never written this essay if Lancia Smith had not said to me 8 years ago, you're a writer. And I was
Wow,
like,
that's
are
powerful.
you serious? And she's like, yes. Here,
Yes.
write
Nancy is
something
right.
for us.
Lucy is right.
She usually is.
That's true.
But in this case, yes, you are definitely a writer.
So I would say read Bandersnatch and then try to find some friends that you can write with and you can be vulnerable with that you trust. And then just like there's no way to soften it. You kind of just have to do it. The other thing I would thought of is somebody made a distinction recently between gratitude and appreciation. And which I thought was really interesting. It's a very subtle thing. But
Yeah.
you're saying like if you have a cup of coffee in front of you, you can say with your mind, I'm thankful for this cup of coffee.
Or this pumpkin spice latte.
Or that.
I had to go there.
Yeah.
But to appreciate it is like something you do with your body. To appreciate a cup of coffee, you stop and you take 30 seconds and you look at the coffee and you say, I like the color of it.
You're so beautiful.
And
coffee.
you close your eyes and you smell it and you say, and you notice what it smells like and you say, oh, that is a good thing. That's a good smell.
Mm-hmm.
I like the warmth of it in my hand. I like to,
Yes.
hear all these things. And what you're doing is you're experiencing the goodness of something outside of yourself. And you're finding that God has made so many good things. And you live in a very beautiful world that has so much to appreciate and to kind
I
of
love that.
enter into.
So
with
appreciate is more the experiencing it and taking time to notice that you're experiencing it. Where gratitude is is a little more removed.
Like a head knowledge more?
I guess the way that this person was putting it was in terms of head knowledge versus like actually embodying a practice of noticing and entering into the goodness of a thing.
I love that. Which inspires more gratitude.
Right.
Yeah.
So to appreciate it is to inspire even more gratitude, the thankfulness.
And knowingness, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for those. That's awesome. And then the last one, there's like a whole section we don't have time to really touch upon, but I think it carries...
Buy the book, people.
I'm telling you, buy the book. You won't be sorry. It carries a lot of significance in this chapter, I think, and that's that of being actors, or Christians being actors in a drama. And that description has been overused, I think, a lot, but I think you hone it in and you pull it in a way that's really, really clarifying. So in this portion of the chapter, you argue that the true power of creativity, that is in all of its potential, is only realized when we submit ourselves to the study of both the script, which is the story we're in every day, and the script writer who put us there.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful analogy. But can you, to take us sort of out of that, like, like headspace of, especially for those of us who haven't done any drama, you know, and don't necessarily have that firsthand knowledge of what it means to be on stage, to act something and put yourself into a character and what that means to follow the direction of a script versus a director, etc. Can you just kind of break that down into how, say, a regular Joe who's just going around like renovating his 200-year-old house, or a parent who's slaving away in the kitchen to make yet another meal for their children who will probably be like, I hate this. Yeah, can you just kind of like break that into terms that they can just understand, but also like embody and like grasp onto with hope?
Yeah. And of course, I'm ripping off that whole concept from a lot of different places, but
Sure.
Glenn Powell has talked about it at Imagination Redeemed retreats. And Hans Urs von Balthasar has this whole theodrama idea, and Jeremy Begbie talks about it in terms of jazz and like playing music within a tradition. And you need to, like, in order to enter into that tradition, you're not generating it, you are participating in it.
There you go.
And so that's true for us too. We have this script, this scripture. And one of the cool things about, you know, you talk about ordinary Joe, like the Bible is full of all kinds of people, like in all kinds of situations. You got farmers and moms and kids and families and, you know, kings and queens and
prostitutes.
And, yeah. So it's like there's room for everybody to kind of see themselves
on that stage
as invited into this script, you know, as a role to play in it.
An image bearer.
As an image bearer, right. And so one thing I think you can do, you can never do enough of, is just like keep reading the heck out of it. Just read it again and again and again.
Yep.
And so, but then as far as how can a normal person kind of see themselves in that way, I think of something Terry Moon and I were talking about just yesterday, because I was asking her about how do you relax when it comes time for you to perform? And if you're playing a strenuous orchestral piece, like how do you get the tension out of your body? And she was talking about these breathing techniques. So we were talking about breathing. And she's like, but you know, every time I breathe, I have to remember, like, I'm receiving a gift from God when I breathe. And then we went on to say, yes, and then when you breathe out, you have an opportunity to make something out of what has been given to you. So I can breathe in, and then I can breathe out and say, Christina, you're a good friend to me. And I got to make something out of the breath that God gave me. I got to turn it into words that can be a blessing to someone else. And I can do that with my face, with my body language, with my tone of voice. Everything I do, down to the smallest thing, even a cup of water, a cup of cool water, Jesus says, is an opportunity for me to receive something from God. Think about how He does things according to the way I've seen Him act in history, the mighty acts and the promises for the future. How is He related to other people? Pay attention to that, and then receive what He has given me, and then make something good out of that can be life-giving, in harmony with the way that He lives His life. Because the ultimate idea is, God is just saying, come live with me. Come, there's room for you in my house.
Right.
I want you to be with me where I am, doing with me what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I want you to use anything you can think of, anything you can get your hands on, anything you are made out of yourself.
Yes.
To do that in any way you want. In that, so that can be anything.
Yep.
You know.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I think it's the end quote of your chapter is perfect right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. So I'm going to read it. I'm sorry, you can't read it. I'm going to read it for you.
You read it.
I'm going to read it. This is what you say to close the chapter. Be assured, we were made for this, to be with and like our God. And whatever unimaginably glorious work He is up to, we've been created to labor in its realization with Him, to be yoked together with the Logos Himself, the very Word through whom all worlds were made, and in whom Worlds yet to be made await.
Yeah.
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 So good.
Who knows what's coming, but he's bringing us into that work.
He is.
Yep.
And we can be fully, like, we can be participants in confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, before we close, where can we encounter more of this amazing work of Matthew Clark? Either your beautiful songwriting or your authorship, your friendly face. Where can we find it?
Yeah, my website is matthewclark.net, and you can find out about the two. I'm in the middle of a trilogy of books/albums, so it's the first 2 books of the Well trilogy are already out, and Only the Lover Sings is the first one, and A Tale of Two Trees just came out this summer, and each book has an album of songs. All the songs are already online on Spotify, YouTube, my website, and the books are available through my website or on Amazon.
Wonderful. That's great. It's also perfect timing because apparently there's this massive construction noise somewhere.
Someone's cutting down a tree.
Someone's cutting down a tree.
Eating granola very loudly.
Yes.
A giant eating a granola bar.
I'm just really hoping that the 2 times my stomach growled during the podcast did not get picked up. But I should have eaten something with my coffee, apparently.
Well,
Speaking of granola, off to eat.
Yes.
From our pub, the Anselm Society digital pub has had much to drink, and it is time to wind down with some delicious food.
Yes.
And as we wind down, we see that the fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and we've all polished off our final glasses. Once Again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. To find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us at anselmsociety.org. And while you're at it, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.